complicated, you know, man. It's like a dang Rubik's Cube, man. You like talking about blue, red, man, then you get to one side and like messed up.
Well, Dan Baltic, welcome to the Jay Burden Show. How are you doing, man?
Good. Thank you for having me on, Jay. It's been in the works for a while, and I am thrilled to be here.
Yeah, there's a joke. There's the Jay Burden Show bingo card, and that's on the bingo card because I am terrible at scheduling. And so I go through these kind of like fits of productivity where I reach out to like 5 or 10 different people, and then inevitably am not as good at following up. So thanks for bearing with me on that. And I was
Oh,
really
absolutely. I mean, as like everyone, maybe not everyone knows, but the co-host of the New Right podcast, and scheduling with people is kind of like you have invites that you send out, people get back to you, sometimes too many people get back to you at once, and then you're like, oh damn, I don't have the time to do this right now. So I totally feel you.
yeah, it's one of those things where it is most often entirely a problem of your own making. You know, it's like, oh, who could possibly be to blame for this? And it's like, oh, yes, I'm the person who did this. So yeah, I'm glad you understand. So I know
Absolutely.
you've mentioned the podcast that you're on, but we're actually here to discuss your book, which I've read. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So if you could, before we get into that, could you just kind of describe, who you are and kind of what led you to pick up a pen?
Absolutely. So yeah, I am Dan Baltic. I've been writing for probably like my whole life, really, and I like many of you maybe was creative writing, well, not major, minor in college. I wrote quite a bit, and sometime around the like many of us, like 2015, 2016, I was trying to get NUTCRANKR published. So I wrote a novel called NUTCRANKR, which many of you may or may not know. And so I did, initially try to get this published by the mainstream publishing industry. I tried to get an agent. Not perhaps, optimistically, I thought, well, it's well written, it's not necessarily libs could read it and think like, oh, it's he doesn't believe the things Spencer believes, which I don't entirely co-sign on that, but my point is that like I think it could be read from a lib perspective and enjoyed. But yeah, that was of course too optimistic. It was not appreciated by the I don't think I got a single response to a query letter that I sent out. So I then kind of like sat on it a little bit. I joined, it was the middle of COVID. There wasn't too much going on. Not that that need be a reason for this, but I joined Indie Thinkers, Justin Murphy's forum, and it was there that I met Matt Pig is my co-host on New Right. So we started bouncing ideas back and forth with each other. We formed the idea to start New Right, and gradually through the connections I made there, I met Matt Forney. Matt wanted to publish NUTCRANKR. I always did want to get it published. Finally, it had a home. It was published on Veterans Day, actually, of 2022, November 11th. And yeah, it's just, some extent taken off since then. And I'm very, frankly, I would not have had it any other way in retrospect, because now I have, instead of having readers, like if in the counter universe where NUTCRANKR was published by like Simon and Schuster, I would not have the audience that I want. I'd have people who appreciate it for the wrong reasons, whatever. And now I have people who like genuinely, I think, love it for the reasons that I intended originally.
Yeah, I will say, so we can get more in depth to this, but just at the kind of like very broad level, before we get into any specifics, I should say your book is extremely funny, like genuinely laugh out loud funny. And
Oh, thank you.
one of the things that I think can be sort of a stumbling block to right wing literature right, is this sort of like dystopian, like, oh, woe is me, it's so over type of attitude towards it. Like
Yeah,
day 306 in Why America. You know what I mean? Where it just comes across as like, oh dear God, just I want to eat a bullet or something. But
absolutely.
your book is obviously alluding to, ideas that people in this sphere would be familiar with, right? But it's one, it's funny, and two, it's not self-serious. Like our main character is there's a little bit of looking in the mirror that I think we should all do, looking at that character. And
Absolutely.
I'm curious, right before we get into it, what were your main inspirations for this book kind of coming into it?
It's an interesting question, and so my process for writing has always been I sit down, I write, and I write until I kind of find I don't start with a plot in mind necessarily or even a character. I just try out different voices. I write until I find a voice that I like. I found Spencer's voice, and I enjoyed it very much. And then as I began writing in his voice, his story became clear to me. Now, in terms of like, well, why did I form that voice to begin with? How did I, arrive at that voice? I mean, I'm a man, obviously, and so I come at you know the issues of modernity from the perspective of a man of my age and social class and whatever political views, and as a result, it kind of that kind of chooses the material for me because I'm interested in the things that men like me would be interested in. And I think like the issues that Spencer grapples with, I mean, I might not necessarily agree with him on everything. I might not, I hope that I'm not entirely Spencer in my day-to-day life. I don't think that I am, but you know it the Nutcranker was born of my finding Spencer's voice and my, interest in the same things that, Spencer finds himself coming up against.
So I'm curious, is your work in any way influenced by Confederacy of Dunces? Because that's a favorite book of mine, and there seem to be a lot of kind of there's a lot of similarities, not obviously in any way in a negative way, between our main character Spencer and Ignatius J. Riley.
So that's an interesting story because yes, I will say 100% Nutcranker not only was influenced by a Confederacy of Dunces, but if I may compliment myself or give myself too much credit, I have told people it's the modern day Confederacy of Dunces, the spiritual heir to Confederacy of Dunces, and this was not something that was in my mind at all when I was writing it. I had read Dunces in my 20s. I'm 37 right now. And I was writing Nutcranker when I was about 34, 35. As I said, it took a little while to get to market. And yeah, I was not, I vaguely remembered Dunces. I didn't remember it very well. And so I was quite shocked later to return to Dunces because I think maybe someone remarked that it was similar, whatever. I reread it and I realized that Dunces was that I was very much writing in the style and continuing the motifs and themes even that John Kennedy Toole had created and written about in A Confederacy of Dunces. And a lot of this I actually set forth in a podcast episode of many of you may be familiar with Art of Darkness. They did a John Kennedy Toole episode. I was on that. We talked all about Confederacy of Dunces and the extent to which Nutcranker is drawing from the great mind of Mr. Toole.
So obviously, I don't want to turn this into a literary analysis of that book, right? Because we're here to talk about Nutcranker. But there is something to which kind of each book is addressing, kind of a sensitive young man in modernity, right?
Absolutely.
In the case of Tool, right, it is this man who by all rights should be some sort of, monk or scholar in, admittedly a slightly more traditional society, right? That is like 1950s, 1960s, New Orleans, but still one that he is kind of very much out of step with. And I think that we see something very similar with Spencer in your book. So maybe this is the point at which we should sort of jump into the narrative. I'm generally not one who respects the concept of spoilers, right? But if you do care about that, uh, please leave. Everything from here on is kind of fair game. So you've been warned. So Dan, let's go into this. Do you want to kind of set out the basic bones of the plot, and then we can kind of take it from there?
Absolutely. So Spencer is, he's if you are familiar with dunces, he's an Ignatius J. Riley type character. He is if not diagnosed autistic, he is, very has a lot of difficulty understanding other people, what they really mean when they say what they say. And so the story starts off with Spencer in prison. We don't know why. He's jacking off. He's trying to like jack off in his cell before this his cellmate comes back, who is a scary gang member type guy who has warned him before about jacking off and will not be happy if he catches him. So this is where we find Spencer at the beginning of the novel, but that is the prologue that is set in the future. Then we immediately jump to the past. We jump to 10 years, I believe, yes, 10 years prior. It was 2019 when we find him in prison. It's 2009 when he is at a party for a professor that he is in love with has thrown a party, and he believes that she is infatuated with him. And over the course of this evening at this party, he realizes that that is, definitely not the case, and disaster ensues. He is humiliated, and that is kind of a loss of innocence moment for him. The narrative then jumps into the future. It jumps to, I believe, 2016, and he is working at some nonprofit and writing something called The Project, which is a sort of neo-reactionary but monarchist integralist treatise. It's not really like fully fleshed out.
It's basically like a prime like schizo rant, right?
Yeah,
Like you would imagine, the most deranged of poster would come up with. There's
exactly.
several points at which it's mentioned that this is kind of, part political theory, part like erotic diary. It's just
Oh
kind of
yes.
it seems to be sort of this like cobbled together kind of like schizo mess almost. But sorry, carry on, Dan.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, one of the things about Spencer is his philosophy is, I mean, frankly, like many people, is, myself included, not like fully integrated, not always well thought out. So it's this kind of mishmash of, different, essentially right wing ideas, but which are not really united by a unifying theory of knowledge or theory of thought. And but he is writing this, and it is called The Treatise or The Project, and he's publishing it to something called 3Chain, which is a stand-in for 4chan. And his employer finds out that he's writing it on a company laptop, and not only do they discover that he's writing the project, but they discover that he's writing a chapter called theory on the equitable distribution of wives, which posits that society would be best run if young women were paired with men of high standing and
It's
distributed.
essentially the state mandated girlfriend, right?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, so that's, that they discover this is like a progressive NGO that he's working at. They discover that he's writing this. He is, summarily dismissed, but in a like a there is a big blow up when it happens. It's very comedic, and he spirals from there a bit. He has more time on his hands, so what else would one do? He joins a BDSM dating and social networking website, and he meets a young woman named Crystal Clancy, who he starts dating, but he believes that the his dating her is in furtherance of something that that he refers to as the project, and he believes that by through the means of sadomasochism he will erode her progressive sensibilities and turn her into a trad wife or something of that nature, give her a true education, but of course, that does not happen. He more than she being subverted, he is subverted, and or if not actually subverted, he is just gets screwed over. She winds up discovering the project. She is not very happy about it. She realizes that in his writings he's referred to her as the piglet repeatedly, other derogatory remarks about her which she did not appreciate. So she obviously breaks up with him. He it kind of casts about. He confronts her. He realizes that she is shacked up with a rival of his, a Latinx progressive guy of sorts who has been an antagonist of Spencer for a good part of the novel, and that does not go well. That confrontation, Spencer spirals from there, and it looks for a while like he's about to go into an Elliot Rodger type direction. But the ending is, I mean, I can just say the ending if I'm good either way. I can spoil
Yeah,
the
no,
ending.
sure. I gave people a fair warning. If they don't want
Mm.
it spoiled, they should read it.
Yeah. So like essentially he has no business, well, not that anyone has any business being doing an Elliot Rodger thing, but he is, he's very inept, and he essentially buys a gun. He takes it to a BDSM party, and he in the moment of truth or whatever, he loses his nerve, but he reframes it as a sort of like embrace of mercy and a greater heroism, and the kind of like that he by sacrificing himself would hinder the success of the project, and that he needs to stay alive, so he does not make good on his Elliot Rodger type dreams, and instead he is, of course, arrested. He so then we are again at the beginning of the novel, at the prologue. He is in prison. As you might imagine, it did not go well after his cellmate found him violating his edict not to masturbate in the cell, and so the rest of Spencer's stay in prison presumably went pretty poorly. But regardless, when he was released, he reestablished himself as um, a de-radicalization expert. And he goes on, this is the epilogue, he goes on like the podcast speaking tour. He becomes a kind of a noted celebrity, cautioning young white men on the dangers of extremism. And ironically, through the kind of application of his beliefs and values, he finds finally material success. He has a woman that he wants. He has money. He has what he needs, and it ends on a somewhat cryptic note saying that the project is going well.
So yeah, and let's, now that we've kind of got through a plot summary, we can go back to the beginning and kind of talk through this bit by bit. But I do want to obviously get back to that kind of cryptic note that it ends on. So I'm curious, right? What was your thought process writing that cold open? Because that's it's not gentle, right? You just start off kind of, you know,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the interesting thing about that opening is, so that was after the fact. I mean, that was kind of, so I started writing it, and once I realized that Spencer, so in the process of writing it, at any moment, I was only probably one or two steps ahead of Spencer in my mind. Because whenever I got to a certain point, I might have a sense of where I want it to go, but if it didn't feel true to like what Spencer would do, well, I had to change course. And so in that sense, I was really only a couple of steps ahead of him the whole novel. And when I realized that he wasn't going to follow through on his Elliot Roger scheme, I realized, okay, so he's gonna go to prison. And so then at that point, when I was at the end of the novel, I wrote the epilogue, because I knew, okay, this is Spencer's story. He, chickens out, goes to prison. I wrote the epilogue, and by that point, I mean, like, there's, probably for the reader a certain kind of like the prologue, not the epilogue. I keep saying epilogue. The prologue is very high octane. It starts off in media res. He is masturbating in his prison cell. He is, about to be confronted by his large gang member, roommate, cellmate, and this is a lot more kind of tense and zany than the first and second chapters of the novel. And the reason why is, I mean, I wrote that at the end of the novel. I wrote that when I was already like, I had already completed Spencer's journey. So I went back, I wrote the prologue to draw them into it, and I realized that like this is actually perfect, because it's written from a place where I just like know it's already like hyped up. I know who Spencer is. I know the kind of craziness that he's gotten himself into. And so I enjoy that the reader jumps like right into this crazy scenario, and then is suddenly in a more kind of like placid narrative that unfolds gradually, but you kind of have a taste of where things are going to go.
yeah, that makes sense that you wrote it afterwards. I was sort of wondering that, thinking about it later. And I will say, I think that having that be the intro sort of creates this tension in your mind, where at least I was going through the book being like, all right, when's this going to happen? Like, when are we going to end up here? Because there's kind of multiple, confrontations in this book. There's multiple points
Oh
at which,
yes,
things
yeah,
could go badly. And so it's a very effective way to add tension to it. So going on to the kind of the opening chapter to the book, right, which is this sort of autistic loss of innocence, right,
yeah,
in which our kind of main character Spencer, shows up to this. I think it's an after this class has concluded. He's sort of fallen in love with this professor, and she's having a house party, with the other freshmen, and it's sort of this. And maybe I'm hypersensitive to these kind of like social situations, but the whole time I'm just like like curled up in a ball, like I'm just cringing so
yeah,
hard because and it is a little bit. It's obviously unintentional, right? But you much of the book is sort of Spencer's inner dialogue, and so in between his kind of shall we say like halting advances, right? He sort of shows up to this party too early, brings an entirely like overly expensive bottle of liquor,
mm,
tries to kind of chat up his professor unsuccessfully, and then gets into an unnecessarily like contentious argument with this kind of like, skintellectual feminist in his class. And so do you
Yeah.
want to kind of talk through, Spencer, where he continually kind of takes on, ironically or perhaps not, the arguments of kind of progressives?
Yeah, I mean, Spencer is he is. I mean, at that point, at the beginning of the novel, I think he is more. This is the way I intended it. That he at that point is more innocent, more naive, and he essentially considers himself a classical liberal of sorts, a libertarian, and he's just kind of like thinks like, oh well, I have my views and they have their views, and we will live and let live. And he doesn't understand that when he challenges the intellectual, that is seen very differently from the professor's eyes than from his own eyes. And indeed, many things all are seen very differently if they're viewed by people other than Spencer, because he is very delusional about his own capabilities, his the extent to which his own um, mental state is something that other people would relate to. So yeah, he kind of like throughout the narrative, that a lot of the humor relies on the fact that the way Spencer understands the world is obviously not the way other people, normal people, understand the world. And they, you as the reader, you can see this clearly, but Spencer cannot. And so there's essentially all the humor boils down to a sort of dramatic irony where the reader knows more than Spencer, and knows that he's about to step on the rake and it's going to hit him in the face. And so it's so much more funny when it does. And my I've said this before about satire. The reason why I think that it works, I mean, if I may, compliment myself, whatever, the reason why I think it works well in Nutcrankr is because I have affinity for Spencer. I like Spencer. And as a result, I it's not, I mean, though I think I am quite merciless with him. It's not really from a place of um hatred or antagonism. And for that reason, the narrative, it's kind of it's rich. It's you Spencer is not a two-dimensional character. You see his strengths, his weaknesses, and and in some sense, yes, even his mistakes and humiliations are. I would like to think they at times approach even a tragic dimension, and that just would not be the case if I were trying to write about someone who was just like deluded progressive, because I would not feel the same level of sympathy. So it would probably just come off as like the inverse of a Saturday Night Live skit that skewers conservatives, and that's fine. But I mean, that's not the stuff of literature.
Well, this is actually, you bring up an interesting point, and I'm kind of equally fascinated by the concept of satire. And I think you bring up an interesting point, which is the dimension of, and this is kind of a therapeutic word, but of empathy, right? That idea that if you absolutely despise someone, it's not really satire, it's propaganda. Like SNL
Exactly.
doesn't satirize Red America. They just hate them and want them gone.
Exactly.
No one's like, oh, the Nuremberg laws, that was some good satire, right? And
No.
so I think that there's something to that, in that, in having empathy, there is also a side of that kind of poking gentle fun at, people like that, people like us. And I think that we've sort of all had that moment,
Oh
where
yes.
you sort of, you spurg out a little bit, you go a little bit too hard in the paint, and turn what should have been a sort of a light social situation into a uncomfortable political debate.
Absolutely.
And I think that it's funny because, you know, that's like a worse, more exaggerated version of something I've done, you know?
Yeah.
And so there's sort of that kernel of truth to it. Like, oh yeah, I kind of made an ass of myself, but also the comedic element to it. So the next chapter kind of brings us, you know, several years in the future, right? Spencer is out of school. He's working at this progressive NGO. And it sort of, this is a moment that has either happened or is kind of, you know, feared to happen in many of our minds, right? And that's the moment at which, you know, your online posting comes up, you know, in sort of an HR tribunal. So I'm curious, right? What were your thoughts in writing this segment of the book?
So this was very much, yeah, it was fueled by my, personal fear of like, yeah, what if you were doxxed? What if, how would someone respond to that? How crazy would that be? And like in Spencer's case, it's compounded by the fact that he is just, so oblivious to OPSEC. He's doing it on a work laptop. He like his, project is the spurgiest thing imaginable, the equitable distribution of wives. Not that I necessarily think that's a bad idea, but it's obviously it's phrased in such a way that it's just not going to go over well. And so it's kind of like, well, if I were doxxed, people would, I'd have a lot of explaining to do. Like, you're, a lawyer and professional, but you're also the nut man, like that. That would not go over wonderfully. But in Spencer's case, it's kind of, I mean, I think like in addition to that, there's certainly like a way to spin, like in my own personal life, NUTCRANKR. Well, there's literary merit to it, and like New Right Pod, there's certainly a lot of merit to that. I can, ultimately at the end of the day, like I feel I can stand behind the work I've done if I had to. Would certain employers agree? Probably not, and that's a good thing that I have my own business. So that's neither here nor there, I suppose. But in Spencer's case, it's kind of doubly kind of grabs at this insecurity that many of us have, this fear of being doxed, which is truly like it could ruin your life, your income, your ability to make ends meet. And in Spencer's case, there is just like no precautions taken, just like brazenly. And he cannot, because of his mindset, he cannot fully appreciate that the lib mind would not see the logic and the beauty in something like the equitable distribution of wives. And that, I think from that, a lot of the humor is derived, because he's just like kind of like still at on some level, Spencer is like always that guy who's like, the left has lost its marbles.
Well, right, and there's this kind of darkly comedic scene, right, where he is being interrogated, and his supervisor is sort of asking him like, "Oh, do you write all these horrible things?" And he's sort of in process of both denying that it's him and defending his argument. He's like, "Well,
Exactly.
I've never heard such a thing, but on its face, it sounds like a good idea." You know, and again it is funny. You know, there's no two ways
Yeah.
about it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. And I mean, like in that scene, like I very much, like I hope people in some way see that as a redeeming aspect of Spencer, that even like when it would be like, truly in his best interest to just shut up and just, deny, 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 he has too much like pride in what he's written to say no. And he has too much kind of like attachment to his own beliefs to say like, yes, no, I could never write something so horrible. And so like one of the things I wanted to illustrate with his narrative arc is that it is Nutcranker is, it's a comedy, but I feel like within all comedies there is some tragedy. Within all tragedies there is some comedy, and there is certainly a tragic element here in that at the end he is, to I suppose his ideals are never really fully fleshed out. He's not exactly Kant here or something. He hasn't really staked out his ideas in greatly detailed fashion, but he does have ideals, and by the end he's realized that his ideals are pointless, and the most important thing in the world is to just maximize your own ability to enjoy life and be in the best blush, in to be fruitful and have a family and multiply. But yeah, I mean, it's meant to be in some sense. I want a reader at the end to be like, that's it's kind of sad that Spencer lost that passion.
So let's kind of go on to the next segment, right? We've gone through, his firing, and then, right, he sort of springs up this relationship through, like you've said, this BDSM dating site. And the way that it's described, is that he sort of carries over his work into sort of the comment section, right? Kind of like rating and responding to, the posters there.
Absolutely.
And it's this sort of like discordant mix of, shall we say, very frank, sexual description, and this like overwrought, like extremely flowery prose that is very kind of reminiscent of Ignatius J. Riley. And so he meets this woman who's kind of this kind of dumpy, unhealthy, overweight, progressive woman, and they sort of spring up this relationship. So do you want to talk about, before we get into kind of the next scenes, his relationship?
Yeah. So he finds Crystal Clancy, who is the woman he meets through the BDSM dating site, and he essentially discovers that he can use this website to get laid with Crystal. And that is like because like Spencer is, he's a spurg. I've suggested, and it is true that, in it is canon that Spencer has had sex before Crystal, but like 2 or 3 times. He's like, and it's just like women were drunk, what have you. So he, Crystal is kind of like an opportunity for him to actually, have a girlfriend. And he kind of uses this kind of avenue, and because otherwise he would, if he did not uh, suggest that the reason why he's doing it is to further his project, further his ideology, that the reason why he's seducing or trying to seduce Crystal is because of his commitment to the project and his attempt to, kind of subvert her into traditionalist ideology. He would just simply have to admit that he's using this BDSM website to get laid, and it's how he's going to get laid. And so he dresses it up in that fashion, and he meets up with her, and the part of the humor is he's told himself that he's there to kind of instruct her in the ways of patriarchy, but he is on this date cucking at every corner, every instance when she brings up something that he would object to. he, to mollify her, he agrees. And that goes on. And and that is kind of like the cornerstone of their relationship. He, like, like probably many of us out there at times have just nodded along when women have said things that we knew to be wrong or that we disagreed with. And yeah, so that is that dynamic, but it's seen through the eyes of Spencer. So it is, wildly absurd and kicked up quite a few notches.
And that's an interesting dynamic you bring up, is the kind of constant rationalization, because as you sort of see this, the conclusion of it is not out of nowhere, right? He's kind of continually, compromising more and more, throughout this, basically to keep access to this woman. And it's kind of this kind of like dissonance, which is where a lot of the comedy comes from, between his internal dialogue of like, well, this is why I'm doing this, and what he's actually doing. And I think
Absolutely.
that the sort of the culmination of that is when they go to the Women's March, with her kind of
Oh yes.
her collection of friends. So do you want to talk us through kind of the scene that happens, when he gets talks into going to this Women's March?
So yeah, he winds up kind of like she wants to Crystal. She wants to go to the Women's March, and Spencer, in dating her, he continues to have this uphold this kind of fig leaf notion that their relationship is somehow furthering patriarchy and the project, and instructing her in traditional morality. So he views going to Washington D.C. for the Women's March as a yet another opportunity to watch after her and kind of like keep her away from you know global Marxist elements and stuff of that nature. And essentially, but the true reason why he's going to this thing is he doesn't want her to go alone with this guy Enrique, who he fears will have sex with her. So he's there to kind of like make sure that his girlfriend doesn't sleep with this other guy. And of course, his Spencer does not fit in at the Women's March. He's essentially dragged there for the wrong reasons. Not that they're really the right reasons, but he's there, and he winds up after his girlfriend says some stuff that really disturbs him, and he kind of sees this romantic rival of his, Enrique, making overtures toward other women that he's interested in, including his own girlfriend. He gets upset, and he decides that he's going to try to hit on Enrique's girlfriend. And this is in the middle of the Women's March. And so he doesn't really understand social dynamics. He goes up to her, and he, for whatever reason, gets it in his head that he's going to be like a fun guy, and a fun guy would like tickle her. So he starts tickling this other guy's girlfriend in the middle of the Women's March, until she's trying to push him away, and then finally she does, and she like kicks him, and he's like, oh wow, that really hurt. But then he sees why she kicked him so forcefully. He tickled her so much that she peed in her pants at the Women's March, and that creates quite a stir. There's Antifa types wind up coming around because people are shouting, screaming about how Spencer has violated this woman. And yeah, so the Women's March does it goes worse than could possibly be imagined for Spencer.
And there's sort of this continual humiliation, where he has this, kind of this paranoid, maybe not even paranoid idea that, Enrique is sort of, taking his girlfriend away. There's a moment actually, which his girlfriend, this happens right before the tickling, right, where she sort of, proposes bringing him into their relationship.
Yes, a throuple. Yeah.
Yeah, a throuple.
So like, yeah, I mean, it's already like, yes, it is a threat, and like this guy has like, if it was unclear in the text, I did mean for it to appear as though Enrique is like a legitimate rival who is like trying to like bully him and make him look bad. So like that is actually going on. That is the authorial intent here. So Spencer is not insane. He's just not, he's not defending his territory in the way that is, probably most optimal.
And so this sort of, and throughout this interaction, there's kind of a series of moments when Enrique sort of, emasculates him or kind of puts him on the back foot. And, after that, right, they go back home. And shortly afterwards, Crystal discovers the project, right? Discovers his manifesto, and somewhat understandably just hits the roof. She
Yeah.
breaks up with him. She leaves him, and we sort of see him kind of hit, I know not quite rock bottom, but pretty close to it, right?
Yeah,
He's described
absolutely.
as drinking pretty heavily. He's not been working this entire time, and he's just calling her, texting her, trying to get in contact with her. And he decides, he's going to go to her house. And Crystal is described as, living with her sister. He meets her sister, and throughout this, right, Crystal lives in a worse area of town, and we get his sociological notes, right,
Oh yeah.
on the neighborhood she lives in, which is that's almost worth the price of the book. Like that part's funny enough that it's kind of like, well, I mean, I'd almost just listen to a travel log written by this character.
Yeah, that
But
was one of my favorite parts, frankly. Like Spencer writing about this Brooklyn Italian neighborhood and how he like values their traditional beliefs and their like, like honest, unaffected masculinity. It's yeah. I mean, like those are some of my favorite chapters. I think I mentioned too, he's in the chat right now, Sir Topham Hatt. I concurred with him. One of his favorite chapters is Spencer's new ruffian friend, and yes, that's one of my favorite chapters too. Spencer's new ruffian friend, where he leaves a an encounter with Crystal's sister Kelly, goes very poorly. She threatens him with a stun gun because he tries to hit on her, and so he's like very worked up on leaving, and he runs into a kind of like Brooklyn Italian guy wearing like a North Face jacket or whatever, and he's so worked up about what had happened. He just says something like, that bitch up there is whack. Her name is Kelly or something. And the kind of the guy is he's just a normal guy, and he's run into the Spencer, who is a lunatic. And so he's just like, okay, great. And but Spencer, of course, like builds this all up in his mind. He's like initially unsatisfied with the guy's confused take on his take of some of what had happened, but then he constructs a counter narrative where the guy agrees with him wholeheartedly, and he leaves this encounter with this random individual, with the sense that like he has formed a kind of like or experienced a moment of true masculine camaraderie.
yeah, there's something to that, and I think one of the I guess the continually funny moments in this, and there's one right before he goes on his failed Elliot Rodger reenactment, where he sort of has a failed attempt with a homeless man, and then he tries to kind of chat up the black bouncer at this BDSM club, and fails incredibly in both events. And
Oh yeah, yeah.
it's I'm sort of running out of ways to describe this, but it is very well written. Like the
Oh,
character
thank you.
of Spencer is incredibly amusing, and specifically the way that he sort of tries to, in his mind, adopt the social convention of other people is very, very funny, because it's sort of this like Chris Chan way. In seeing him try to relate to others, you see how completely off base his conceptions are, and it's sort of this interesting prism through which to view that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the kind of the narrative is the um Tukey's Mag. They did an excellent review on their sidebar podcast about, or stream, whatever, about NUTCRANKR, and they mentioned that it's kind of I think it was Gabe who mentioned it, that it's a crooked view at a straight line, and like it is clear, I think, to the reader, to everyone, what is actually happening. It's clear to like everyone but Spencer, and Spencer misinterprets all these events, and that is kind of like, if it's I would like to think that it's funny regardless, but if you are somewhat sympathetic to Spencer, it's also like a little, in a weird way, it's endearing. At least I find it endearing.
No, definitely. So we're sort of coming up on time, so we're going to have to kind of rush through the back half of this, or back third of this book, which is
Sure, sure.
probably good, right? Obviously,
Yeah,
we don't want
I
to
mean,
just talk about everything. There's things that we have sped over, for the reason of time. And so essentially, and I'm going to kind of rush through this, Dan. He has a confrontation with Crystal and Enrique. Turns out she's at his place. Goes poorly. Enrique ends up kind of sucker punching him, which again is a sympathetic moment. And he just punches him, like right between the legs, just knocks him down. And then from there, right, he leaves and basically decides to take his revenge on the world. Right, he drives across the country, in search
yeah,
of a gun show, which is its own kind of comedic scene.
yeah,
I'll
yeah,
leave that up to the imagination of the viewers. And decides, what, I'm going to take it out on the world. Not. And there's a second subplot we haven't, second storyline we haven't mentioned, of his continual unsuccessful efforts to get his project published or to like keep it hosted, which is, a storyline worth discussing, but we just do not have time to. But he decides, what, I'm going to take it out on the world at this BDSM, party. And what is it called again? Because the name of the BDSM event is quite funny.
it's Monkey Love May Day, so it's a celebration of the communist holiday May Day, and also free love. So Monkey Love May Day.
I was telling you
party.
before that I was kind of reading this in the background, while my camera was on for work meetings, and I was laughing. And specifically, the moment was when he says "Monkey Love Mayday" like 5 or 6 times in one paragraph, and for some reason that's just a funny phrase. Like it's just a
Oh,
phrase
yeah.
that had me giggling.
Yeah, I mean,
And so
it just
I'm
came
kind of,
to me.
yeah, it was well put. And so he goes up to this event. First he talks to a homeless man who just goes insane because he sees that he's armed. Kind of ineptly makes an attempt to chat up the bouncer, and then goes in to kind of take his revenge on the world, which he ultimately unsuccessfully does. You've said that he is he goes to trial, is not convicted of very much because he essentially flips, and decides like, oh, I'm going to become a de-radicalization expert. And then there's that last scene, like you said, that's on, I think it's like the way you phrase it is a very famous podcast or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, frankly, I will just say I was thinking of Sam Harris. That scene. I was thinking that he was on Sam Harris's pod talking about like his attempts to de-radicalize young white men.
And then it kind of, there's that moment, and I'm going to butcher the exact lines but you've said it before, right? That it's like all according to plan, where he basically says like,
Yeah.
oh, this is what I wanted. I got everything that I wanted, which is its own interesting point, right? That how much of, our scene is legitimate politics, is how much of it is just an extended version of like that feeling when no GF,
Yeah, absolutely.
So I talking in kind of like big, like sweeping statements, What were the ideas that you were sort of hoping to get across with this book?
I was trying to get across I'm not sure if I was really trying to get across ideas. I was more trying to get across the character of Spencer, the kind of like how it is possible to, you know, hold all of these ideals, but yet at the same time hold them ineptly, be a failure, but still at the end of the day be a kind of in some sense empathetic character. And like what I wanted to show in Spencer was really his kind of trajectory from a kind of optimistic classical liberal type in college to a kind of mishmash of neo-reactionary ideas in his late 20s to at the epilogue he is this de-radicalization speaker to a grifter. And I wanted it to, I hope that people view it as a tragic comedy, a comic tragedy, something like that. And I will say that I'm writing Nutcranker 2 right now, so the story continues.
Well, good, because I left this wanting more, and I'll put it this way: there are some books that I read because people in these circles write them, and it's like, okay, well, this
Yeah,
is part of supporting the scene, right?
of course. Yeah.
This is a book I would have read otherwise,
Thank you.
all
Yeah.
politics aside. So that's a pretty wholehearted endorsement from
Thank
me.
you. I
And so,
appreciate
Dan,
that.
if people want to find out more of your work, or if they want to buy this book, what's the best way for them to do that?
So yeah, just Google Nutcranker. That's NUTCRANKR. No E at the end. KR. And you can buy it from Terror House. You can buy it from Amazon, whichever you prefer. I mean, like, frankly, it would be better if you bought it from Terror House. But I know that sometimes people are lazy. You already have an account at Amazon. Don't let like a registration process stop you from buying the book. Buy the book, buy Nutcranker, and you can also, if you want to read my writings, go to danbaltic.substack.com. I have a short story there called The Doxing Dom, which is perhaps even more horny than Nutcranker. So check that out. And I will actually have a new essay published on my Substack within a few days or so. It's almost ready to drop, so that's coming. And I assure my nut army that after my long day as the unsung hero of the American economy, the small businessman, I am writing Nutcranker 2, and the chapter I'm writing right now is the opening. Well, I've already written other parts, but the opening I've decided is going to be a sort of is ripped right from the news with the Ryan Thorenson Karsten guy. It's going to be that type of encounter in a type of Brooklyn neighborhood, but it goes very differently than it went in the case of that sad progressive man who didn't do so well that evening.
So before we wrap things up, Melon has a very insightful super chat for $2 that just says in all caps, nut. So thank you for that. I appreciate your input. And again, Dan, thank you so much for appearing on the show. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me on, Jay.
Definitely.
It's been a pleasure.
And as far as my links, you guys know where to find me. The show is available on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere you listen to podcasts. If you want to support the show, the best way to do that is to check out Axios Fitness and Coaching. If you follow that link down there, you can sign up to any one of the workout plans, including one that I am currently using. And so if you want to see a leaderboard where you can see how much I'm lifting, and if you're stronger than me, well, that's a pretty good way to do it. And you can support the show as well. And again, Dan, I appreciate it so much.
Oh, the pleasure's mine. Thank you, Jay.
And everyone at home, keep your head up. The lie can't last forever. Good night.